Hello and welcome to Farmland. On this week's episode, we'll be focusing on everything to do with Harvest 2022. I'm joined by Agriland journalist Richard Halleron and Bobby Miller from the Irish Grain Growers Group to talk about yields so far, the Ukraine conflict and the effect on markets. I'm joined now by Agriland journalist Richard Halleron and Bobby Miller from the Irish Grain Growers Group. Thank you for joining us today. First, Bobby, I might start with you and just ask you in overall terms, I suppose, about the grain market at the moment. The most topical thing on everyone's lips at the moment is the conflict in Ukraine, for example. We had heard that there was a grain deal, arranged between Ukraine and Russia last week. But then subsequently, I don't know where that deal stands now with the bombing of Odessa port. From your point of view for grain growers, how do things stand?
The markets are fluctuating. No one knows what's going to happen next, and that's the reality of the situation. And we're at the market's mercy. And that's the current situation. We're all observing what's going on in the Ukraine, obviously, but other parts of the world, North America now is going to be very important this week, what way the markets are going, or the crop reports are going to go there. So we're at the mercy of the markets here in Ireland because we compete with imports. So
this, I suppose, is it the sole focus of the markets at the moment, whether or not that grain can come out of Eastern Europe?
It's not the sole focus, it's the main focus, obviously, because we all fully aware now how important the Ukraine is for import or for the grain production. But you have to look at all over the world. You have to look at what's happening in Canada, you have to look at what's happening in North America, South America, Indonesia. So that's normally what you have to be looking at, the world trade basically, because we're a commodity, we produce a commodity at the end of the day. But obviously all eyes is on Ukraine at the present and Russia, so that's current.
And is that among the biggest challenge for grain growers at the moment, Bobby, in the sense that there's no certainty, things are fluctuating so much, whereas prices were probably good in June, but now, we're heading July, August, and things may change again, that it's very hard to forward plan.
Yeah, it's very hard to forward plan. Like, we're only less than a month away from start our new season, the son of winter oilseed rape, and we're planning already for for crops for harvest 2023. So it is, it's very concerning for us. I won't say this, you have to manage it as best you can. And fertilizer prices are currently, like for 2023, you're talking about €800, €900 for nitrogen, and compound fertilizers heading for €1,000 presently. Like, they're phenomenal expenses going forward for us that we have to start taking the risk for now in less than a month's time. So that's where we are as tillage farmers. We're co-upping all this in our own way and the way we do our business, So grain prices are stronger than normal. We all know that, but the costs associated and the risks are there at the end of the day. And as always, we're dependent on the weather.
This is it. You're in a very precarious sector within agriculture as a whole. You're dependent on markets. You're dependent on the weather. Obviously, recently it hasn't been too bad. But let's talk about Harvest 2022. I suppose just with barley and some amount of oats, I think has just been harvested. You've been around the country, Richard, a bit and seen a few tillage operations. How's the harvest going so far?
I suppose the winter barley's more or less wrapped up. Very variable yields. That's the first thing I'll say, and that some very good yields and some very poor yields. So I'm guessing, well, it's hard to quantify at the very minute. For in a couple of weeks' time, it'll become more clear. But I'm guessing yields be back on winter barley compared to last year. It'll definitely be back on last year. Would it be near the 5-year average? More probably. Winter oats, the harvest has started last week. Yields look promising from what I've heard so far. And oilseed rape has started as well, and mixed reports, but I'd be guessing they look good overall, but it is very early stages to really make a call on that. And spring crops looking quite good as well. They're getting good weather for filling the grain. So overall, yield-wise, it should be quite good, but the first crop that's harvested is winter barley, and that has been disappointing. But that's where, so you don't know till the end of the harvest, really.
Yeah, the reports that you've had of late as well about the barley yield, I suppose, has been quite variable, just as Bobby said, Richard.
Yeah, very much so. Some cases down to maybe 2 tonne per acre, but in some cases as well, there were some really good crops, 4 tonne plus. I think in an average year, you'd be looking 3, maybe 3.5 tonne across the board with winter barley. But just to pick up on one or two of the points that Bobby made at the outset there. Grain growers this year in particular, they need 2 things. They need good yields and they need good prices, because truly, as Bobby has alluded to, I mean, all of the input costs impacting on their business this year have gone through the roof. I mean, we have seen fertilizer prices quadrupling. I mean, and the scale of the increase, I mean, has never been, you know, we've never seen the likes of that before, hitting not just the tillage sector, but right across farming as a whole. Back in June, there was a pretty strong message put out to the effect that growers should have looked seriously then at forward selling their grain. And I'd maybe just go back to Bobby and ask him the question: had you heard of many growers forward selling this year? Because to me, with I suppose the power of hindsight, those that did forward sell at the height of the market, I mean, would be in a pretty good position right now.
Yeah, it's a thing that's not practiced a whole lot here in Ireland. Tillage farmers it's not a thing they're accustomed to doing. Up to a couple of years ago, less than 5% of the grain was forward sold. Now that has increased in 2021 and perhaps this year. Now the peak of the market currently was, as Richard alluded to, was about 6 weeks ago, a month ago, and some did forward sell, but you can't. The rule of thumb is you don't sell more than 50% of your crop, because you actually don't know what you have until you harvest. Whether event
it's a
comes
gamble,
along.
really.
Yeah. But it's a thing that it's an area I'd like to see focused on a bit more for tillage farmers to secure their lower the risk going forward, especially as I mentioned earlier about fertilizer prices. If you're thinking of buying fertilizer for next year, you're going to have to consider forward selling some of your grain as well to reduce the risk going forward. But it is available. What else is available and is price insurance and crop insurance. Price insurance is available to farmers that you can lock in at a price. It's a complex subject we couldn't really get into here today. You need an expert on it, but it's definitely worth considering going forward for tillage farmers, where you lock in at a certain price, and if it happens to go up, you're able to take advantage of the higher price going forward. So it's I'll call it novel, but it's available in a lot of other countries, in the likes of America, and it's in other European countries. So it's a thing we should be considering going forward for Irish tillage farmers as well. And the merchants, the buyers of the grain, should be making it available to farmers as an option.
And Bobby, you mentioned there that the yields on barley, for example, are variable to say the least. I think you said we started with the oilseed rape. We'll be going on then to winter wheat and spring barley after that. So what is your prediction for those? I suppose you can't know, as you said, it takes a while to know what the yields will be like. What do you need the weather to do? How has the weather been?
Harvesting weather has been quite good for the start of the harvest. We're all experiencing the warm days, and that's been very helpful to harvest the winter barley. And the start probably brought forward, the harvest is early this year, has brought forward definitely the oat harvest and the oilseed rape harvest. They usually don't start for another week or so, and harvesting started last week. So weather has been favourable, and the conditions have been dry overall. The growing season has been quite a dry season, so we got rain when we needed it, I suppose the best way of putting it. There was a worry there a couple of months ago that we're going into a drought situation for all farmers, grassland farmers as well, and thankfully the rain came at the right time to save the year in that regard. But so far so good weather-wise, and we're hopefully get a bit of an opportunity now this week again. I know the weekend has been unsettled if you're up in the north of the country this year, or this weekend.
Or the west.
Yeah, the weather was, we saw we're flooding the cord, so that's the mercy you are as tillage farmers as well, or like I've crops to harvest this week, and hopefully you'll get the weather for it. Like, you're at the real stage of where you can lose a lot of your crop if the weather doesn't be favourable, so you're gambling all the time, I suppose, from the start of the year right to the time you harvest the crop.
That's true.
Well, just to pick up on that point, I mean, if you are growing grain or growing crops at all, I mean, the big issue is getting that weather window to allow you to get out with the combine to get the harvest sorted in good order. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Ireland has the potential to grow the highest yields, produce the highest yields of grain in Europe, in the Northern Hemisphere that I'm aware of, because we always are guaranteed that continuum of rain, of moisture throughout the crop's growing cycle. The big issue is getting that harvest window to get the machinery, the combines out, and to get the crop harvested safely. Bobby mentioned the fact that the winter barley harvest is now more or less completed. I think in places like Donegal, they're that little bit later because of that further north, but to all intents and purposes, the winter barley harvest is over. The comments coming back to me would be that BYDV, barley yellow dwarf virus, has been a real issue this year, and that has been the key contributory factor in terms of dropping yields in many locations. Would you tend to agree with that?
Yeah, definitely concur to that. And take all is being factored in as well. Talking to a seed company employee there at the weekend, and he is factored in take all, which is quite strange to a degree. Take all, most farmers know how to handle take all, but it just happened to come into the equation this year as well. But BYDV was the main reason. I myself got affected by it as well. Like, you know, so talking about the science element of it now, you know, the products that's available to us and the chemistry, like they're dwindling year on year, and we have to reach EU targets now as well. So it's there's a lot of challenges ahead for the tillage industry, but I'd like to be positive about it as well. We are currently in the midst of reaching emissions targets here, and the very topical subject is the 22%, 30%. A tillage acre is practically carbon neutral, and that's not being portrayed enough in our eyes. If you want a solution to targets, increase the tillage area here and invest strongly in it as well, at processing level as well, and not just at farm gate level. So our biggest demand for our grain is feed. We need to change that attitude. We have to bring back the likes of the milling industry and process, like the flexitarian diet is growing. There are facts coming from the likes of Borbia. So there's a bit opportunity there, but there's a lot of challenges coming ahead for us. You know, only at the weekend there's submission to be gone into the EU on gene editing. They're looking for feedback on that. So a lot of interesting stuff going on, but a lot of challenges at the same time. I'd be optimistic for the tillage sector, but only if the influencers of this country realise it as well. And I don't think enough people realise that what the tillage sector has to offer as a package.
I suppose some of the things that you mentioned there are concerns and policy for national government, and some of it is obviously coming from Europe. You mentioned there the challenges that every sector is facing in regards to environmental targets, but the disease element of crops that you mentioned earlier, and Richard mentioned it with the barley yellow dwarf virus. We were even discussing this, Richard, recently, where simply from a very, I suppose, mundane level, I cannot kill the weeds around my house, and I have tried, and myself and Richard as an agronomist, I was getting his advice, and it just becomes a thing that what's available in the co-ops or on the shelves or, you know, in your local agri store now is just not really suitable anymore. It's not, and we have to protect the environment, but at the same time, you have to protect food production, which is what, you know, tillage is, or grain. So I suppose and this is coming from Europe then, you know, the restriction on a certain number of herbicides, pesticides and so on, that's coming from Europe. How are tillage and grain growers managing that challenge?
I saw there's many elements to it, I suppose. One key element is seed breeding. The new varieties of seed coming along that are showing resistance to certain weeds and, well, not weeds, sorry, fungicides, diseases on crops. So that's one element of it, and that's why I mentioned the gene editing. That would be very helpful if available, as distinguished from genetically modified. So that would be, it's challenging as I said earlier, it's challenging how we want to reach these goals that they set for us, and in the same breath, we have to compete with grain coming in from other parts of the world that don't have the same standards at all. Currently, we've lost a lot of products, chemical products anyway, over the years. Richard, fully aware of that. All the products that we've lost recently have lost clarisinol and the seed dressing. The BYDV is very helpful for Rodigo. That are two products gone recently, so we're facing these challenges currently, all the time. We're constantly facing them, and what's next? Maybe biological solutions, and how we look after our soils is healthy soil means healthy crops, which mean far less pressure on diseases in crops.
And what about tillage farmers in terms of, we'll say, things like the nitrates directive or water quality and so on? In the past, they would be a particular sector of a particular industry that maybe would be criticised for that. Do you feel that really farmers have come so far in recent years now that they're well able to, adapt to any sort of requirements that are needed?
One line that comes to me all the time is farmers know their own soil best. Currently, the Nitrates Action Plan, the references that we have to be guided by aren't available yet. We're supposed to be cultivating soil at present. We're waiting for those guidelines to be published. What was initially made available, we were not in favour of at all. We were gone to the Department of Agriculture and Department of Housing straight away on it to bring a bit of what we consider reality to the situation. Having to cultivate all your ground post-harvest made no sense in our eyes. Not to say that we're not opposed to it. Let farmers farm the way they feel best. I hope and I'm expecting changes from what's there presently, but the information isn't out from the department yet of housing. We're waiting for it to be signed off, and we're hopeful for some changes that's currently there. What's there isn't viable in our eyes. As tillage farmers, as I say at the start, we know our soils best. Cultivating all the soil for several different reasons. The likes of oilseed rape ground, your advice is don't cultivate for 3 weeks post harvest, but let the seed chit. Same with other problem weeds like grass weeds, some particular grass weeds. The advice is from the likes of Chagas, don't cultivate for 3 weeks, let the seed chit. So we're hopeful that the department, they have got information from the likes of Chagas now on the nitrates, and hopefully we will get solutions in the next week or two on it. But it is a big concern. It's at present. Richard will tell you.
Yeah, Richard, I know that you've been looking at this, and you've been looking into the tillage incentive scheme, the protein aid scheme recently with the department.
Yeah, I suppose to get back to the fundamentals, I truly believe there's a very buoyant future, buoyant future for tillage. I think farmers, to a large extent, will have to get back to basics, and that is look at what constitutes a rotation. Bobby talked about farmers know their own soils best. They do, but I mean we need to get back to basics, and that to me is centred on the rotation that you follow, into the crop rotation that you put in place on your farm. Bobby talked earlier about oilseed rape. I remember 25, 30 years ago, if you got a ton to the acre of oilseed rape and you could get the combine to go through it half right, you felt you had a good day's work done. Today with oilseed rape, you could be looking at yields of certainly closer to 2 tonne to the acre, smaller standing crops that are much easier to combine. So rape is an example of something that has tremendous, I believe, has tremendous potential within Irish tillage systems. I think the figures in relation to the tillage incentive scheme confirm that there has been an uptake for it. I think the tillage area has gone up by 6%. And I think the flexibility that's been built in for livestock farmers, where they have the option now of either growing the crop through to grain or they can take it off as a crop silage, I think adds to the further to the flexibility of the scheme. there is potential to get beans right. I mean, and we're looking at the protein schemes, the protein side of it, to grow more protein here in Ireland for consumption within Irish livestock farms. I mean, there's huge potential there. I think it's sitting down and working through the practicalities of that and making it more relevant. I do know that beans can be an issue because you've got that late harvest window with them, but there is still huge potential there to make that work and to allow farming as a whole to become more self-sufficient. And within all of that, tillage has got a very positive role to play, I believe.
Finally, Bobby, I might go to you on that point about, I suppose, food security in relation to grain and producing our own grain here. I'd imagine you concur with Richard there about the cruciality of having our tillage sector here supported.
Yeah, 100% so. We're after losing 40% of our tillage area in the last 40 years. The last couple of years it has increased. We have a Minister for Agriculture who is supportive of the tillage sector, to be fair to him. We'll have, obviously, not everything he does is 100% in our eyes, but we have, as Richard says, we have a very good future for the sector if we invest in it. Other crops, Richard mentioned oilseed rape. I have oilseed rape at home, and it's actually going to be exported because you don't have processing facilities here. So there's one typical example that we could invest in. Oats is another fabulous crop in my eyes, and grown it the last 7 or 8 years on my farm, and it's a lower input crop from fertilizer point of view and chemistry point of view. So we have methods that we can hit targets that they're expecting, but we need investment at government level and in the department, and we need to educate. One problem I find with as a tillage farmer is the lack of knowledge on tillage. Now it is a complex business, but the lack of knowledge is surprising me at times, by people that are making decisions, and we need to educate tillage farmers on that. I'll repeat again, tillage is the solution, one of the solutions to emissions in this country. Teagasc have shown the research that says that a tillage acre is carbon neutral with a couple of minor bits of tweaking. So our solutions here is not being discussed enough. I've been following a lot of debates. We're talking about forestry and the dairy herd or the livestock herds, and very little. They're almost dismissive of the tillage area, and we can increase the tillage area by threefold if we wanted to. Now that's really optimistic, but the land base is there to increase it that much, and that would have a huge impact on hitting our emissions targets by just increasing it. The amount, like where our emissions are 17 times less than a dairy acre, and that is, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure that out. That's only positive,
Fantastic. Well, Bobby Miller from the Irish Grain Growers Group and Agriland journalist Richard Halleron, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
That's all from this week's episode of Farmland. Thanks for tuning in. You can stay up to date on all your agricultural news on agriland.ie, and be sure to follow us on social media at the following links.